for the special LG's not here. So
Yeah.
it's on the thing that's set together.
All right, so I'll open up with a question. Is God here with us in this room?
Yes. Absolutely.
How do you know that? How do you know?
The Bible tells me.
What's that verse, sweetheart? I asked you to look up.
Matthew 11.
What is that passage, Pastor, where it says where 2 or 3?
Together in my name.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not talking about how he's omnipresent and he's everywhere, which this room is somewhere and everywhere. How does he make his presence known to you that he is here, right here, next to us, beside us, in our midst?
I'm going to talk about it this morning. So.
To me, it's a very personal answer. As you can see, I write my lessons out. All right, I've got them here. But what you don't see are the countless edits that happen between what I've written and what is presented to you. There are certain things that I really focused on that I wanted to say that just get cut out. And it's right here in front of me. I mean, it's not that I couldn't see it, but God doesn't want me to say that particular thing. Or he'll add certain things into it that I don't have on here, which really is frustrating because we're trying to put all this stuff and assemble it together in some literary format. The edits don't make it to the final cut. But he did this during the children's service too. I mean, whenever, and there were a lot of times, Pastor, that I would not know exactly what I was going to talk about, but I definitely didn't know what you were going to talk about, and how my children's message and your sermon would harmonize, and the music that was chosen. And
sometimes the things that I wrote the book.
And none of us spoke about it at all.
I never told Doug what my sermon titles would be, but he'd always come up with songs that match my message.
And I think you've only requested a song of him once in the entire time that we've been here. What was it that?
Once or twice he said,
I want a picture of this, I want this song in there. And that's only happened 2 times in the entire 4-year period that we've been here.
But there must have been a half a dozen or more that happened by accident.
That's right.
Accident. But in the children's messages, sometimes I was really scrambling because I didn't know what I was going to talk about. I really, literally did not know what I was going to talk about.
He was driving down Rivers Avenue. He's like,
I don't know what I'm going to say.
I still don't know what I'm going to do about the children's message.
Just skip it. And then I get up there, and the people afterwards like, man, that really touched me. I really needed to hear that. Well, the reason that happened is because I went up there, presented my vocal cords, mouth, and lungs, and he did everything else.
That's the same way I feel about what I used to write. I'll go back and read some of that stuff now, and I say, I couldn't possibly have come up with that on my own, and it's not possible.
So what do we call churches themselves? We call them houses of God, right? He doesn't need one. Okay? He invented, in Genesis 1:1, you can see he invented space, time, and dimension, and matter. He invented all of that stuff, right?
All of the planets.
Everything that we see, touch, think about, boom, he spoke it into existence, right? So what could he possibly be in need for? Now, we build houses for very specific reasons. What do you want a house for?
Wanted the pool.
Yeah.
And I just wanted a place that I could live in.
Okay. Where were you prior to this?
A big apartment.
A big apartment.
We were there for 12, 13 years.
But an apartment is sort of a sub, in the thinking, an apartment is not the same as a house.
It's a temporary place.
And an apartment is not the same as a Winnebago.
No.
And a Winnebago is not the same as a tent. Okay? So there's different levels going in there. And what is the string that draws all those from going from a tent, per se, to a house? Safety, protection,
Stability.
And we get houses primarily to a place to put our stuff.
You remember that thing?
You need to build a bigger house.
The refrigerator is a box you put stuff in to keep cold. Inside the box you keep all your other stuff in.
The entire universe isn't big enough to house God's stuff, let alone Him. There's another reason that we have houses. We have them so that we can invite others over to visit. We get a chance to show our hospitality. If someone shows up, we get a chance to show compassion to others.
Show off my clocks.
The house is also a place that you can go if you need to find somebody. I mean, think about it. If you want to find me before the invention of the cell phone, there's only 2 places right now that you could definitely go where you might stand a good chance of finding me. What are those two places?
The mall and your house.
The mall and my house. That's right. Because those are the places I'm going to be. So the assumption is that if you have an address to visit somebody, that's the place you're going to go. Well, God, being infinite, has no address. So in that case, God's house isn't so much for him, but a place for us to go where we can trust that he will be there and show us hospitality and compassion and listen to us. That's what God's house is. It is the temple that we're going to talk about today was not for God. It was for the people. It was for God to be able to keep his rules in place and keep control over it. There was a place for people to come and visit him. It was not a place for him to dwell. God doesn't need a dwelling place. In fact, if you want to be perfectly honest about it, God's perfectly comfortable right here in the heart. That's where he wants to be. A big stone and cedar structure is meaningless to him if it doesn't have people to visit him. That's the whole point. So last week we discussed how Solomon built the temple, and we looked at the massive project that the house of God really turned out to be, how many people were involved, the quarries, and all that stuff. I wanted to get to Solomon's palace today, but God edited my plans. I started looking at it. We're going to be 1 Kings 8 today, by the way. But I started going through it. It was just a grocery list of all the beams and the shapes and the room sizes and on and on and on. It was more boring reading that than going through the baguettes. And I was not going to put us through that. I originally believed that the fact that it took Solomon nearly twice as long to build his own palace as it did for him to build the temple was an indication of his priorities. But you got to think about this. Solomon's palace had to house multiple hundreds of wives. It was a much bigger process than doing that. It was a public service thing. I mean, he had baths out there and all that stuff for his palace. And so that's why it took him 13 years. Plus, he didn't get all the people in drafted labor to come in and do it. It was more of an internal process for that. So God gave me this lesson instead. The temple has been completed, but it's missing the namesake resident. So today God enters his house. Sweetheart, would you read 1 Kings 8, verses 1 through 9?
Then King Solomon summoned into his presence at Jerusalem the elders of Israel, all the heads of the tribes and the chiefs of the Israelite families, to bring up the ark of the Lord's covenant from Zion, the city of David. All the Israelites came together to King Solomon at the time of the festival in the month of Ethanim, the 7th month. When all the elders of Israel had arrived, the priests took up the ark, and they brought up the ark of the Lord and the tent of meeting and all the sacred furnishings in it. The priests and the Levites carried them up, and King Solomon and the entire assembly of Israel that had gathered about him were before the ark, sacrificing so many sheep and cattle that they could not be recorded or counted. The priests then brought the ark of the Lord's covenant to its place in the inner sanctuary of the temple, the most holy place, and put it beneath the wings of the cherubim. The cherubim spread their wings over the place of the ark and overshadowed the ark and its carrying poles. These poles were so long that their ends could be seen from the holy place in front of the inner sanctuary, but not from outside the holy place, and they are still there today. There was nothing in the ark except 2 stone tablets that Moses had placed in it at Horeb, where the Lord made a covenant with the Israelites after they came out of Egypt.
Okay. So they moved the ark from the tabernacle, which that's the tent, to the temple. Now, remember the last time that they tried to move the ark from that guy's garage to the tabernacle tent, that was when the guy touched it and died. And then the next time they brought it in, David danced around like an idiot in front of it, and his wife chastised him for it, and then she never had any kids because of her how she was offended. But notice who was here this. Now, it doesn't say Solomon danced or anything like that, but you've got to look at who was there. The entire assembly of Israel. I don't know what that means. But that's got to be everybody. I mean, this right here doesn't really even give a good accounting, I think, of it. And this is Solomon's, royal dais right there, I'm guessing. And he's standing right there in front of it, and all the people are bowing down and all that stuff. But I mean, that all of Israel. I mean, remember we talked last time. It was just larger than Berkeley County, just the people that did the work, just the men that did the work in the quarries and all that stuff. So you got to think, what if we had a big brouhaha, and all of a sudden everybody in the Tri-County area showed up? That'd be huge. Right? So he's doing this with the entire assembly of Israel to be part of this. Keep in mind that this temple is God's gift to them, the people that are watching this. I don't think a lot of people understand that. I think the same sort of thing, and I get teary when I think about this, but when that one guy had to carry Jesus' cross, he said, look, tell those people that I'm an innocent man. He was the guilty man. Jesus was the innocent man. So I think a lot of times God does this where they think that this is for God, but it's actually for the people that are standing there, and they're not really cognizant of it at that time. And this isn't to house God, but it's to give the people a chance to rededicate themselves to Him. And also, the temple is supplanting the tabernacle is significant because the tent was mobile. Okay? Why wasn't it? What's the difference between having something that can move and something that is stuck in a foundation?
That's it. That's the difference.
Well, think about this. The tent was made mobile. Why? Because the people were going to be moving. Why were the people moving? They didn't have a place to stay. They, even at this point, they still had enemies that were chasing them out. Remember the ark? They brought it out in front. They got kidnapped and whatever. Remember that whole story? So having a mobile tent was imperative because the people were constantly meandering and wandering. Now this is significant because this is God saying, you guys are settled now. There's not going to be any more roaming. It's assuming, of course, that you keep my commands and obey, that list. And then it's going to mention here again today. But anyway, so the point is that this is permanence. This is the difference between living in a Winnebago, which may sound great, retirement years. I just want to tour the nation or whatever. But there's something different about having roots, having a foundation, having something that is yours and is always going to be there. And that's what the significance of this is. It is a statement from God to the people that you guys are staying. A structure with a foundation is immobile, gives the impression that they, as a people, shall wander no more. In fact, the future, when they're forced to leave, what happens to this temple?
Torn down.
Every time. Every time. And that's why the prophets were always looking to the temple as being something important, because the temple, if it's there, that means the people are there. That God is there with the people. And so the fact that every time that they get taken out, whether it's the Assyrian, Babylonian captivity or the Romans or all that stuff, every time that they are kicked out because of their sins, presumably, and turning away from God, we'll get to that point when we get there. But anyway, the point is that every single time that happens, their sign of permanence is taken away from them. The temple has a permanent feel to it, and just as we would feel difference between living in a tent versus an apartment versus a house, there's an advancement there. And now, God makes His presence seen. Verses 10 through 12.
When the priests withdrew from the holy place, the cloud lifted the temple of the Lord, and the priests could not perform their service because of the cloud. For the glory of the Lord filled His temple. Through how many? 12?
13.
Then Solomon said, the Lord has said that He would dwell in a dark cloud. I have indeed built a magnificent temple for you, a place for you to dwell forever.
A dark cloud. When I saw that, it's sort of like, what in the world is that all about?
Doesn't sound good.
It doesn't sound like something very godly. You think of God as being radiant and eminent. The burning bush, lights, something like that.
Right.
Okay. So I need you to turn to Exodus 19:9. So in order to see what that means, because I looked it up, I tried to figure it out, and I had to do some heavy duty research to find out why it would say that God said that He would dwell in a dark cloud. Did He ever say that? Has that ever occurred before in the history? So Exodus 19:9, what does it say?
The Lord said to Moses, I am going to come to you in a dense cloud so that the people will hear me speaking with you and will always put their trust in you. Then Moses told the Lord what the people had said.
All right, now 16 through 18, same chapter.
What was that last one, 19:9?
19:9. Yes, sir. This is at the base of Mount Sinai as he's about to go up into the
I've got 16. How many more?
16 through 18.
18, okay. On the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning with a thick cloud over the mountain and a very large trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like a smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently.
All right, one more set from you. Exodus 20, 18 through 21.
Exodus 20, 18
through 21, yes, ma'am.
When the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain smoke, they trembled in fear. They stayed at a distance and said to Moses, "Speak to us yourself, and we will listen. But do not have God speak to us, or we will die." Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid. God has come to test you, so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning." The people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was.
That's God's presence. All the way back. Now, God cloaks his glory in a dark cloud. I mean, you can see that the depiction of Mount Sinai, you see the glow emanating through the clouds, but there's this dark cloud surrounding him. Same sort of concept of what they're talking about here at the temple. That he's made a dark cloud. All of a sudden, this whole dark cloud just fills the temple. And once again, like I said, it doesn't seem to be very godly to be in a dark cloud. But this is when he shows up. What was it when Job had his confrontation with God? What was it? It was through a dust storm, a dark storm approach. Every time that God comes down, whether it's on Mount Sinai, whether it's to Job, or whether it's in the temple, it's a dark cloud surrounding him.
Isn't it true that God is so magnificent that if we were to see him clearly, it'd be too much for us to stand?
I don't think that's biblical. I think that's something that people try to put in there. I do know that God uses angels as his messenger boys, to often come down and talk face to face with us. Whenever you hear people talking face to face, it's usually with an angel. God doesn't talk face to face. God has cloaked himself because, once again, he didn't even give us his name. I mean, he wouldn't give us his name because the theory is that if you know the name of your God, then you have control over your God. You can evict him to do things for you or whatnot. That was the ancient concept. They still do that to this day. In fact, it was so silly. He said, "I am. I exist." That's what his. And they made Yahweh and Jehovah and all that out of just that word, "I am."
The word "I am" can be conjugated to every tense, past, present, and future.
Which is what God is, the
I was,
eternal and everlasting.
I will be.
And existence. It's not. It doesn't mean that I might exist, or it is I am, which is a definite I exist. So when God spoke to Moses in the burning bush, it was the voice, but he didn't actually see the face of God, so to speak. Can you imagine? And the recently, look at this though. Look at how this full circle completes itself. The recently freed Israelites just came out of Egypt. They saw it. And now these Israelites, with the dedication of the temple, are seeing the exact same thing. Why is it the exact same thing? Because, as you said, God doesn't change. Past, present, future. It's the same thing. Now, granted, it's separated by 480 years between one and the other. But that's a drop in the bucket when you talk about God and eternity.
Well, it's also like we talked about this morning on our way here. Humans are stupid. They need to be reminded sometime in your face reminder, and that's what God does.
Can you imagine what would happen if God's dark cloud came in here? I'd be worried that something was on fire, originally, and it would definitely evoke fear. And you also notice it said here that they feared the Lord, and it says here that if you fear the Lord, you'll do what he says. Isn't that what beginning of wisdom is? Fear. The beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord, meaning that you let him guide you because of this. So this is a full circle all the way. And these people that are at the tail end of it, today's discussion, you got to go all the way back. Plus, I also want to point out to you, what did they just put in the temple?
The ark.
Which contains what?
The Ten Commandments.
Mount Sinai? You see how it all just, I love how God just tightens all these little circuits and circles, throughout all this stuff. We tend to think, whoa, that's weird. No, it's just It's part of this cycle.
Isn't the rod of Aaron in the?
Yeah, and a jar of manna, supposedly.
Yeah.
Those are the other items.
What is it?
A jar of manna, Aaron's staff, and the Ten Commandments.
Did you read the cartoon, the bulletin today?
No, sir.
It goes along with it.
No.
Really?
Solomon is there in front of the entire assembly of Israel, and they are all witnessing this powerful experience together. And Solomon then turns to the people there and he speaks to them. Come on, would you read 14 through 21 in 1 Kings 8?
While the whole assembly of Israel was standing there, the kings turned around and blessed them. He said, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who with his own hand has fulfilled what he promised with his own mouth to my father David. For he said, 'Since the day I brought my people Israel out of Egypt, I have not chosen a city in any tribe of Israel to have a temple built for my name, to be there, but I have chosen David to rule my people Israel. My father David had it in his heart to build a temple for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. But the Lord said to my father David, because it was in your heart to build a temple for my name, you did well to have this in your heart. Nevertheless, you are not the one to build the temple, but your son, who is your own flesh and blood. He is the one who will build the temple for my name. The Lord has kept the promise he made. I have succeeded David my father, and now I sit on the throne of Israel, just as the Lord promised. And I have built the temple for the name of the Lord, the God of Israel. I have provided a place there for the ark, in which is the covenant of the Lord that he made with our fathers when he brought them out of Egypt.
Do you see a duality here also, another circle of completion here? God made a promise to my father, and he's fulfilling that promise. He made a promise to us with the Ark of the Covenant. The covenant is a promise that God made to us, and that's also fulfilling itself full circle. So whether you're talking about a promise that was 20 years old, or you're talking about a promise that was 480 years old, to God it makes no difference. He keeps his promises. In the beautiful circle of this, all this time I was taking us back to the beginnings of the Ten Commandments, the moment of the covenant, and here Solomon is talking about it, proving the point again. He also takes him back to the moment of Mount Sinai. Doesn't bring up the fact that, hey, he came in a dark cloud just like he did then. He didn't do all that, but he did point out that what we're celebrating here is a renewal of the covenant for us and a fulfillment of the promise of God. So it keeps going. And as I typed in here, God edited the Ten Commandments were brought down 480 years ago. That's 480 years of God not changing. And what does he want from humanity?
Same thing you did in the beginning.
The same thing he wanted back then. We heard him say to every leader of the Israelites, and Solomon in particular, that if you follow and obey my commands, I will never abandon you. What commands?
The 10.
The ones that are in the ark, right here. I mean, you see how this keeps coming back to this whole thing. All the loose ends are tightened up. And Solomon knows that God keeps his promises and is reminding the populace of what God has done for him personally, but also for them. And all this time, God's dark cloud is right there in front of them. You can't deny the fulfillment of the promise. It's right there in front of you.
In your face.
And while you have everyone there, Pastor, I got to be honest with you, and while you've got everybody there, the glory of the Lord, and the dark cloud, and all that stuff, you got to just have a prayer. I mean, you can't just say, look, this is a fulfillment of God, go in peace and be well. You've got to have a prayer. Prayer is talking to God, right? Well, he's right there. Why not? The perfect opportunity to pray to God when you can see his presence. His dark cloud is right there in your midst. So go ahead. So you can't let that opportunity pass you by without a prayer. And Pastor, if you wouldn't mind reading verses 22 through 26.
That's an 8th chapter.
Yes.
23 through what?
22 through 26.
Then Solomon stood before the altar of the Lord in front of the whole assembly of Israel, spread out his hands towards heaven, and said, O Lord God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven above, on earth below. You who keep your covenant of love with your servants, who continue wholeheartedly in your way. You have kept your promise to your servant, David my father. With your mouth you have promised, and with your hand you have fulfilled it, as it is today.
26.
Now, Lord, God of Israel, keep your servant David, my father, the promises you made to him when you said, you shall never fail to have a man to sit before me on the throne of Israel. If only your sons are careful in all they do to walk before me as you have done. And now, O God of Israel, let your word that you promised your servant David, my father, come true.
So this is interesting. You see, Solomon knows the rules. Remember we talked last week how God reiterated those rules to him at least 3, maybe more times, just in that one lesson alone. So he's reiterating. I'm going to start keeping count. I didn't do it this morning, but I wrote a 1 next to this one. So this is the first time we're going to hear it today. That you shall never fail to have a successor sit on the throne if your descendants are careful in all they do and walk before me as faithfully as you have done. That's obey my commands.
We broke it. He didn't.
That's right. And it's so tragic to me because I know how this ends for Solomon. You know what I'm saying? Had he stayed here, there's no telling what would have happened with Israel and even to modern times. But and right now, let's go with the highlights here. We have to obey his commands or else he's going to leave us. And he knows and shares with the people how God keeps his promises. This is the second reiteration of this. And how unchanging he is. Solomon is aware of all this. It's not just because God gave him wisdom or whatever. God, Solomon has seen it and experienced it firsthand that God does not change. So let's go into the next set of the prayer, 27 through 30. Sweetheart.
But will God really dwell on earth? The heavens, even the highest heaven, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I have built? Yet give attention to your servant's prayer and his plea for mercy. Lord my God, hear the cry and prayer that your servant is praying in your presence this day. May your eyes be open towards this temple night and day, and this place that you said, my name shall be here, so that you will hear the prayer your servant prays towards this place. Hear the supplication of your servant and of your people Israel when they pray toward this place. Hear from heaven your dwelling place, and when you hear, forgive.
So Solomon's making the same point I made. What does God need a house for? He's aware that God doesn't need this structure, yet he asks God's focus be on this place. All right? So that whenever someone prays towards this building or uses this building to try to communicate, that you'll hear their prayers and respond. For me personally, it says here that this place, my name shall be there, that he never gave us his name. You know what I'm saying? It's sort of interesting. Pastor, what is supplication?
That's a real reading. How does he use this selection?
It says, hear the supplication of your
That
servant.
must be the deep prayer of the deep needs of the servant of the
So if prayer is here superficially, and supplication is here.
down from way deep within.
Down from way deep within. And now he gets into the part of the prayer that I find really interesting. Dad, 31 through 34.
This is what I call when you really get serious with God in prayer. There's one thing to pray, and there's another thing to really get serious with God.
It make it a personal, more of an intimate experience than just talking to him.
31 through 34.
Yes, sir.
When anyone wrongs their neighbor
Bad grammar.
and is required to take an oath, and they come and swear the oath before your altar in this temple, then hear from heaven and act judge between your servants, condemning the guilty by bringing down on their heads what they have done, and vindicating the innocent by treating them in accordance with their innocence. 34. When your people Israel have been defeated by an enemy because they have sinned against you, and when they turn back to you and give praise to your name, praying and making supplication to you in this temple, Then hear from heaven and forgive the sin of your people Israel, and bring them back to the land you gave to their ancestors.
This is number 2. This is the same concept, right?
Yeah.
See what he says here. He says, but he said, if they're defeated by an enemy, why are they defeated by an enemy?
Because they broke their side of the covenant.
Because they broke their part of it. And then they recognize that, turn away from that, return to you, hear their prayers, forgive them, and restore them.
Restore their land.
Isn't that the exact same pattern that we talked about earlier? All right? Isn't that the if-then-else clause that we've been discussing numerous times? God doesn't change. You can take different flavors of the same concept, but it's there. And we also have seen this pattern repeat numerous times, not just in Israel and the Judges, not just with Solomon and what's going to happen, not with the Old and New Testament, but and not just in our own society today, but in an individual basis. We go through this all the time. We get punished, we get smacked down, we sin, we all of a sudden have to acknowledge that sin, turn away from it, go back to Him, and He'll restore us. He does this on so many different levels, whether it's an individual, whether it's a land, whether it's a region, whether it's the world. That is the pattern. So this is the second iteration of that. Does God's temple being built mean that they will never know defeat from their enemies? Solomon knows the truth. Obviously not. Does accepting Jesus remove all the trials and tribulations of life? No, of course not. Unfortunately, that's the concept a lot of churches are pushing out there. Accept Jesus and know no hardship. It'll be all sunshine and daisies. But look at the foreshadowing here. If they are defeated by an enemy. Why? Because they sinned against you. And after that, when they turn back to you and praise you, hear them, forgive them, and restore them. This is exactly what will happen several times. It's happened multiple times. We've already talked about it. And like I said, it's a more personal thing to me because it has happened to me in my life. Now, what this tells me is 2 things. God doesn't change, neither do we.
That's true.
God doesn't change, and neither do we. And God understands this flaw in our construction. He built us. He understands free will has this as a consequence. Okay? So, since God doesn't change, and we don't change, this pattern for restoration doesn't change either. It's necessary. It's invaluable. It's the only way that you get into heaven is through this pattern right here. Since God doesn't change, the resolution is the same for us as it was for Solomon. But now we're getting to something a little bit more down to earth, so to speak. What about famines and plagues and natural things, disasters happen? What about that? Mom, 35 through 40.
When the heavens are shut up and there is no rain because your people have sinned against you, and when they pray toward this place and confess your name and turn from their sin because you have afflicted them, then hear from heaven and forgive the sin of your servants and your people Israel. Teach them the right way to live and send rain on the land you gave your people for an inheritance. When famine or plague comes to the land, or blight or mildew, locusts or grasshoppers, or when an enemy besieges them in any of their cities, whatever disaster or disease may come, and when a prayer or plea is made from any of your people Israel, each one aware of the afflictions of his own heart, and spreading out his hands toward this temple, then hear from heaven, your dwelling place. Forgive and act. Deal with each man according to all he does, since you know his heart, for you alone know the hearts of all men, so that they will fear you all the time they live in the land you gave our fathers.
Okay, isn't this a remarkable piece right here? Once again, they will fear you all the time. I think that the fear of the Lord is beginning of wisdom, meaning that you don't want to disappoint Him. You're going to go on the straight and narrow. I don't have a problem with that. I think that a lot of people misinterpret that as being afraid of God all the time. I don't think that's the case.
Deep reverence.
Deep reverence. But we're supposed to pray about these things too. I remember when the pastor asked us, and I've mentioned this numerous times, when you asked us to pray for rain. And I'm thinking, I asked Marty to look it up this morning, when was the drought in South Carolina? I've actually gone back and found a chart of all the rainfalls and when we're in the negatives and all that stuff. And they had one in 2008, 2009, and 2012, but I didn't think that it was that one. It was fairly early on in your ministry, and they had one in 2002 that culminated in August of 2002. Was the worst part of it.
It started in 2000,
Started in 2000.
and it was 158 weeks of not having rain.
Really?
And then it started raining on December 24th, 2000.
Now, the rain does not eliminate a drought, right? You understand that. You can have a little scattered rainstorm. It doesn't end the drought. It just offers a relief for the moment.
You can look on drought.com or
Drought.com.
drought.gov. And every time I went to click on it, it took me to the site. The only time I could see the story was when it was in my little blurb.
Yeah, she clicked on it, brought it to today's updated version, not the one
Now,
that she was
it's
reading
possible
about.
I could have found it better on the computer.
But anyway,
But-
so I tried to look for it, and I just didn't have the time this morning. It's so important to me, and I feel driven to. I can go back and look at all the church archives. I can listen to the sermons and all that stuff and find out when you asked us to do this. But I thought it was silly when you asked us to do it. I mean, honestly, I thought it was silly. Why don't you just give me some Indian headbands and let me go out and dance a little bit and have, you know. But Lake Moultrie and Lake Marion were at record low levels. There were almost dry beds up there.
Always listen to your pastor.
I do remember that they advised everybody not to use the sprinklers in the
Yeah.
outside.
Don't water your yards.
So
Take
the water
showers
level
instead
was
of baths. Turn the water off when you're brushing your teeth. I mean, they were really micromanaging it because it was a concern. The Goose Creek Reservoir was running dry, and that Goose Creek Reservoir feeds North Charleston. So I mean, and those things are fed by Lake Marion and Lake Moultrie, who then get their water from elsewhere up in the state through the rivers, and they were all going down. The Cooper River and the Ashley were ridiculously low, and of course, me being a 2002, I got work to deal with. I got other things I'm worrying about. I wasn't really worried about it, but apparently it was a major concern. Looking back on it now, I realize how big it was. But the pastor asked us to pray for rain. And so we did, as a group. I did my diligence. I prayed for rain, and I probably was a prayer, not a supplication. If you want to think about it that way, it wasn't that deep to me.
You prayed anyway. You didn't have any comfort. I've done the same thing. I think we all have. Some people ask you to pray about a certain thing. Pray for a person who is dying from cancer to get well.
The weatherman.
And it things like this, and you do this, not expecting him to be healed completely. I mean, that's probably wrong in my thinking. But the doctors have given him up. There's no chance for him to live. But somebody says, pray for him to live. What do? You say, no, they're not. I always pray for him to live. But so far, nobody's ever survived in case like that. That's an extreme situation.
The weatherman had not predicted rain for at least another month. But the time that you were asking for that prayer, they had not predicted any rainfall at all for another month. That was how desperate it was. And I think that's probably what brought it to your attention. We need to pray for rain because it isn't happening. We prayed for rain. That afternoon, a surprise freak rainstorm came through and washed us out. And the weatherman the next day looked all embarrassed, egg on their face. The
Bible says the prayer of a righteous person, and I don't like that, I'm not trying to say all that right, but the prayer of a righteous person avails much. And God teaches us in His Word to pray. Jesus spent a lot of time in prayer. And I think we should pray about everything. Anything that is important to me or to my wife, my children, are important to God. Anything important to you is important to God.
But my point here is that He doesn't change. He heard our prayers that day. He said, he'll hear, Solomon is asking him, if something happens, please, hear us and grant us rain. And He did. And once again, I was flabbergasted that it happened. And I wouldn't even, the funny thing is that my house story, I guess being more personal to me, is more of a testimonial than the fact that we prayed for rain and we got it. Although that's probably a bigger miracle than what happened to me. Now, what about the people who aren't Jewish? Right? What's the rules for them as far as this temple goes? Pastor, can you read 41 through 43?
41 through 43, yes. As for the foreigner who does not belong to your people Israel, but has come from a distant land because of your name, for men will hear of your great name and your mighty hand and your outstretched arm. When He comes and prays towards the temple, then hear from heaven your dwelling place, and do whatever the foreigner asks of you, so that all the people of the earth may know your name and fear you, as do your own people Israel, and may know that this house I have built bears your name.
Right, so look at that now. All right, so isn't this the same sort of thing about us as far as how we're supposed to behave as Christians? We're supposed to draw attention because I want what you have. You know, and if you get curiosity, people come over and they ask you about it. We've talked about Cynthia numerous times, but you get this. You want people to come in, and they may be atheists. I mean, for all that you know, or they may be Mormons or whoever. But I want to know what has happened. If you can smile and all of this stuff that's going on, I want to understand it. And then you try to explain it to them, and then it's up to them if the Holy Spirit taps them or not. I love getting a doorway open like that. I'm not one to go knocking on doors. But someone asked me, I have no problem telling them. Same sort of thing with this blessed kitchen, same sort of thing with me and UPS. But anyway, so look, so if someone comes here, why are they coming here? Because they've heard about how great of a God you are, and they're curious. So they show up here and they pray, answer their prayers so that they'll know that you're the one true God. Does that mean that God doesn't belong solely to the Jews? Solomon has it right again. God is for everyone. Yes, he's chosen the Jewish people to be the proof of that, but he doesn't belong to them. That wisdom ultimately gets lost through time, but Solomon has it right here. I'm going to finish up this if I can. And when your people go to war against their enemies, wherever you send them, and when they pray to the Lord towards the city you have chosen and the temple I have built in your name, then hear from heaven their prayer and their plea and uphold their cause. When they sin against you, but there is no one who does not sin, and you become angry with them and give them over to their enemies, who take them captive into their own lands far away or near, and if they have a change of heart in the land where they are held captive, and repent and plead with you in the land of their captors, and say, we have sinned, we have done wrong, we have acted wickedly, and if they turn back to you with all their heart and soul in the land of their enemies, who took them captive, and pray for you towards the land you gave your ancestors, or gave their ancestors toward the city you have chosen, and the temple I have built in your name, then from heaven, your dwelling place, hear their prayer and their plea, and uphold their cause, and forgive your people who have sinned against you. Forgive all the offenses they have committed against you, and cause their captors to show them mercy. For they are your people and your inheritance, whom you brought out of Egypt, out of that iron smelting furnace. So that's 3. Right? It's the same concept.
That's only the third one?
There's only the third one in this lineage so far. May your eyes be open to your servant's plea and the plea of your people Israel, and may you listen to them whenever they cry out to you. For you singled them out from all the nations of the world to be your own inheritance, just as you declared through your servant Moses, when you, sovereign Lord, brought our ancestors out of Egypt. Again, there's this whole cycle thing. And Solomon knows this return clause is important. It's imperative. When Solomon had finished all of these prayers and supplications to the Lord, he rose from before the altar of the Lord, where he had been kneeling with his hands spread out towards heaven. He stood and blessed the whole assembly of Israel in a loud voice, saying, Praise be to the Lord, who has given rest to his people Israel, just as he promised. Not one word has failed of all the good promises he gave through his servant Moses. And I'd throw in here, and the bad ones too. May the Lord our God be with us, as he was with our ancestors. May he never leave us or forsake us. What's the important thing? How do you keep him from leaving or forsaking? Same thing. May he turn our hearts to him, to walk in obedience to him and keep his command. That's 4. The commands, decrees, and laws he gave our ancestors. And may these words of mine, which I have prayed before the Lord, be near to the Lord our God day and night, that he may uphold the cause of his servant and the cause of his people according to each day's need, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the Lord is God and that there is no other. And may your hearts be fully committed to the Lord our God, to live by his decrees and obey his commands at this time. And again, a reminder of this cycle of forgiveness. And like I said, that's number 4. And the reason why it keeps getting repeated over and over again is because it's important. I think that when people step forward and want to accept Jesus Christ, I think that this needs to be, the cycle of forgiveness needs to be given to them. I think a card, with this is the pattern, this is the formula. I was talking to her this morning in the car. I said, I wish that in Sunday school that I had been taught this particular formula. Oh, we brushed on it. We talked about it. If you ask forgiveness, then you'll be forgiven. But the whole cycle about it, and how it never ends, and how God doesn't change because we don't change. That part I think is lost. I think in a lot of in Sunday schools today. And I wish that they had been able to encapsulate it, because if people try to make salvation so complicated,
That's what I said.
they try to make it so complicated. This pattern, which he repeats Who knows how many times we're going to see it in the future. But the point is that he keeps hammering out, it's only this, it's this easy, it's not that complicated, and yet we keep trying to make it as complicated as we can. And it's the same one that we use today. Why? Because God doesn't change, and neither do we. Then the king and all of Israel with him offered sacrifices before the Lord. Solomon offered a sacrifice of fellowship offerings to the Lord, 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep and goats. So the king and all the Israelites dedicated the temple of the Lord. On that same day, the king consecrated the middle part of the courtyard in front of the temple of the Lord, and there he offered burnt offerings, grain offerings, and the fellowship offerings, because the bronze altar that stood before the Lord was too small to hold the burnt offerings, the grain offerings, and the fat offerings of the fellowship offerings. So Solomon observed the festival at that time, and all Israel with him, a vast assembly. People from Lebo Hamath to the Wadi of Egypt. That's north to south. That's like from Boston to Budapest. I mean, that's a big area. They celebrated before the Lord our God for 7 days and 7 days more, 14 days in all. I can do math. On the following day, he sent the people away. They blessed the king and then went home, joyful and glad in heart for all the good things the Lord had done for his servant David and his people Israel. Next week, we will see how God responds to all this brouhaha and what he actually says about Solomon's dedication.
Did you see the line that says, and Solomon said, the Lord has said that he would dwell in a dark cloud?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What verse is that?
So the dark cloud verse, that was earlier on.
That's verse 12 of chapter 8.
But you also notice that Solomon doesn't say he's going to live in this temple. Every time he refers to God looking at us, it's from heaven. Yeah. It's not like you're going to pop out of this box and bless us. He knows. He knows.